is one of great significance. Got it. It's the Caetani family is one of great significance in Italy, and they were actually considered to be one of the top 6 families throughout Italian history. And the family traces its origins all the way back to the 8th century, just south of Rome. Their approximate land holdings in Italy stretched between Rome and Naples. They reached into the mountains of central Italy and also towards the Mediterranean coast and right to the coast. And this is an early coat of arms for the Caetani family, one of the earliest ones of the water. Are we going? Yeah, okay, good. So this shows the area that we just outlined. And basically this area is a map of what's now the province of Latina. And so you can see that it was quite a significant chunk of land. And we'll go in a little bit closer. Sorry, I'll find my controls again. And so this is Latina as it's blown up. So you can see that they had properties all along the coast of the Mediterranean and all the way into where the mountains began. And Gaeta, the little town that's outlined in red at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, that is sort of the origin of the Caetani family. And you will find the name Gaetani as well as Caetani as well, and different branches of the family. And often, of course, during the Middle Ages, people often took the name of the town that they were living in or born in as well. So Gaetani is a much more common name than Caetani. So they had a substantial documented political, cultural, and social history. And they represent, this is actually a picture of Gaeta, and they represent a long line of Italian aristocracy, parliamentarians, artists, writers, musicians, and people of note, basically. The lineage also includes 2 medieval Italian popes. This was the first Caetani Pope, Giovanni, who was Pope Gelasio II, and in the 11th century. And also there's the more colorful Pope Bonifacio VIII, of course. Now, he was the 13th century Pope. He was Benedetto Caetani of Agnani, and he envisioned himself as an emperor pope. And his reign is characterized by nepotism and ruthlessness, basically. Not a nice guy, in other words. He's probably best remembered today for his feuds with King Philip IV of France, but mainly because of his feud with the poet Dante Alighieri, who immortalized Pope Bonifacio by placing him in the 8th circle of hell in his Divine Comedy. So not a place that you want to end up, of course. And so here's a little bit of a fun fact that we have in our little movie also that we present when we give the tours. There is a show on TV called Nightfall on the History Channel, which is about the Crusades in the 13th century. And the Pope in those Crusades, which they call Pope Boniface, is Pope Bonifacio, who is also, for Downton Abbey fans, played by actor Jim Carter. So a lot of people get a real kick out of that this is the Caetani Pope. This is a photograph of Sermonetta. So our Caetani branch of the family, it's actually Sveva Caetani di Sermonetta is what the family went by. And so this is Sermonetta, beautifully lit up in the twilight. And that is the Castello Caetani up at the top of that hill. And of course, in Italy, there are all these mountaintops, these fabulous mountaintop cities and towns. And in the distance, you can see another city that was part of the Caetani holdings also, which is Bassiano. And this is where the plains reach the mountains, and the mountains start quite abruptly at this area. And down below in the plains are again, the famous Caetani gardens of Ninfa down there as well. So, whoops, there's my controls. Sorry about that. I've got some challenges with my controls. So one of the things that happened is that we were actually invited, because of our association with the Caetanis, of course, here in Vernon, we were invited to stay at the castle by the Rafredo Caetani Foundation. Rafredo was one of Sveva's uncles, and they manage the castle. So, so we got to spend 5 nights in the castle while we were staying there. And in the castle, there are all of these dungeons and things, of course, being a medieval castle. What's a medieval castle without dungeons? And probably a few ghosts down there. But Bonifacio held some prisoners down there for over 30 years, and all over the walls there are these extremely fascinating drawings by prisoners that have been done over the years. During the 15th century, the castle, the Caetanis lost control of it for a time, and so the castle was occupied by Lucretia Borgia, who was also a very famous pope, and also it was also occupied by Napoleon's troops. And of course, there are shackles and all kinds of things. There's also quite a fascinating little museum down there as well. And the castle is open for tours, for public tours. So it was very interesting for us to stay there because we were the only living beings in that castle overnight. So if you're at all superstitious or wondering about ghosts or anything like that, it was an interesting time that we spent there. So this is coming up to Sermonetta as you're approaching it on this very, very narrow road. Of course, the roads in Italy are always interesting, going up hills and to these hilltop castles. You don't want to meet really wide trucks when you're going up these hills. And this is just another approach to the castle as we were going up there. The town itself, Sermonetta, is one of the best preserved medieval towns in all of Italy, and it has actually won many heritage awards. And we were, of course, all of these towns are very limited as to what kind of traffic can go through them, as to cars and things like that. So we were dropped off at the main gate, and you can see all the cobblestone, and this is literally a medieval town. So we were dropped off with all of our suitcases and camera equipment and computers, and luckily most of it was all on wheels, but we really had no idea what we were encountering. And we had to walk up to the castle because a lot of the roads are just actually too narrow for cars anyway. And it starts out at a really nice pace, and you can see how the cobblestones there. The city is quite amazing because it seems to be constructed out of marble or something very close to it. And those cobblestones almost looked like teeth, like elephants' teeth and things like that. It had such an interesting texture to it, and they were very slippery and slick and very well worn, of course, over 1,000 years of feet walking up and down them. And so we kept going with all of our baggage, and we kept walking. And as you start getting closer to the actual castle, It does start to get steeper, and so there does seem to be more and more stairs. And then you find out that there are actually about 200 stairs that you have to go up, as well as climbing up the ramped areas. So it took us a little while for us to finally get up there, and we finally did hit the castle on Via della Fortezza, the fortress, the road of the fortress. And so we were able to make it into the castle. And so this is the main entryway to the castle. And one of the fascinating things that that we do like to do is to find in our archives the old pictures that kind of match. So the picture at the right is the one taken by my husband and I coming into the castle. And the picture on the left is actually Ophelia, Sveva's mother, standing at the exact same gate. And that would have been back in the 1920s. And the castle was in quite a bit of disrepair, but it has been quite amazingly restored over the years. So it was really fascinating to see all these photographs and then finally get to actually go there. So this is just a couple of shots of the actual courtyard in there. One of the amazing things about this castle is the walls are anywhere from 4 feet thick to about 20 feet thick. And there are ramparts and princes' quarters and all kinds of nooks and crannies. And the really amazing thing was that we were basically given the run of the castle. And when they locked it up, we could go anywhere, and outside, just the outside gate was locked, and everywhere else was available to us. So it was really quite an amazing experience for us. This is the courtyard at night. And this is the doorway that we would go into across the courtyard. And up on the right-hand side, you see these little square windows. That's a whole wing of the castle that they have renovated. And these amazingly beautiful large bedrooms that are up there. And that's another shot. That's actually our window that you can see, the little square one to the right of the tiny square one, sort of buried in the bushes there. So so it was an amazing place to stay. And they would unlock us in the morning and lock us in every night. And this is the doorway that we had to pass through. And you can see like all of the locks and fortifications that are on there, and there's a little doorway at the bottom. So one morning we came downstairs and we could not for the life of us figure out how to get out of the castle. We just couldn't absolutely do it. So luckily there was a gatekeeper who lived at the bottom of the moat, and so he had the keys, and luckily he also had a cell phone. So we could call him if we were locked out at night, or if we were coming home late, or if, like this morning, we needed to get out of the castle because we were being picked up to be taken somewhere and needed to go and meet somebody. And these are the actual keys to that castle. And so they're still, I don't know how old these keys are, but they look pretty medieval to me, and they actually still use these, and that's how he got us out of there. So here's some shots of the inside of the castle. It's managed by the Rafredo Caetani Foundation. It has been used for many things. While we were there, there was a huge Rotary dinner that was held there for over 200 people. And it has also served as an internationally acclaimed music school. It's an 11th century castle, and Sveva's uncle, Rafredo Caetani, he was a noted classical composer, and he was also the godson. So his godfather was the famous pianist Liszt. So many connections that this family had throughout Europe to many very creative people, and certainly Rafredo Caetani was one of those creative people. In 2015, we actually, the Caetani Centre here in Vernon, hosted a musician, the pianist Alessandra Amara. She was sponsored by the Rafredo Caetani Foundation, and she came and performed here at our local Vernon Performing Arts Centre. So before we had a chance to actually go over and see the castle, she had come from there, and we were able to meet with her. This is one of the views from the castle overlooking the plains that lie below it, and looking towards the gardens of Ninfa from the castello. So basically, this was swampland, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But the gardens of Ninfa, the Caetanis, there's an ancient an ancient road that runs through this area called the Via Appia, and it runs from Rome to Naples. And that's essentially how the Caetanis made most of their fortune, was that they had taxation stations and tariffs. So it was a toll road. You had to pay the Caetanis. If you were going to Rome and Naples or back again, you had to pay the Caetanis taxation and tariffs. And that appeared to be fairly lucrative for them. So the Gardens of Ninfa are an amazing, amazing place. They are 100 acres, complete with Roman ruins. There are 7 medieval towns, mostly in ruins, scattered throughout the gardens. They were constructed in the early 20th century, mainly by Sveva's aunt. And that would be Rafredo Caetani's wife, Marguerite, and they have been described as the most romantic gardens in the world. And anytime you see a garden program like on PBS, where they show all the fabulous gardens of the world, the gardens of Ninfa are almost always included in that series. They were made famous in a PBS series hosted by Audrey Hepburn that I saw actually in the 90s. Basically, the area of Latina was essentially swampland, and they did have like an awful time with malaria. Leone's brother Gelasio was an engineer, and he essentially is the one who was responsible for draining the swamp. And he was instrumental in allowing the space for these gardens to be built. They have been built basically from the ground up. And at the time, this was featured in an early National Geographic magazine, and it was considered one of the most ambitious feats of engineering for the time. So Gelasio was also the ambassador for Mussolini, actually, in the 1920s. He was the ambassador to the United States as well. So many, many connections with this family. The gardens contain many exotic plantings, such as this stand of bamboo. And this is a picture of Bastiano, which kind of shows you how fast the mountains kind of rise up from the plains there as well. So this is Bastiano from the opposite direction. One of the things about being invited by the Rafredo Caetani Foundation is they were very, very generous to us, and not only letting us stay in the castle, but they took us around everywhere and gave us tours and showed us. They were so interested in what we were doing and wanting to show us the history and all the things that were related to the Caetanis. And we also got access to a lot of places that are not normally open to the public. And at the Gardens of Ninfa, this is actually like a hunting lodge, one of the villas in Ninfa. And Lelia, who was Sveva's cousin, she lived here for a while. She was also quite an interesting painter and artist as well. So very interesting that the two, who are considered the two last Caetani of that family, were both artists. So an interesting little parallel there. This is the inside of that villa, and the piano that you see in the corner actually belonged to Franz Liszt, and who was Raffaello's godfather, as mentioned earlier. But many people have come and stayed here. Some of the famous pictures around there that we saw, people like Princess Diana, the Queen of England, and people like that. So quite a fascinating place to tour through. So we're moving to Rome now. This is Palazzo Caetani in Rome, and it's located in quite a prominent place in Rome. This was actually a photograph. This is the Caetani clan. With the two older Caetanis at either end, and Leone, who is the person who is Sveva's father, and he's the one who immigrated to Canada, is the second one from the left. So very tall man. He was at least 6'5". They were a very tall family. Sveva herself was very tall. She was over 6 feet as well. And so that was Leone. So so you wouldn't think that a family that had 5 brothers and 1 sister and various cousins, the three younger people at the end were all cousins. You wouldn't think that there would be any threat to this family. You would think with that kind of lineage and numbers of people that that they would continue on for a long time. And however, they ran into something which is called the Caetani curse. So the Caetani curse is also referred to as Pio Nono's curse. And Michelangelo Caetani, who was Leone's grandfather, and Onorato, his father, they fell out of favor. They were not supporters of the papacy, even though they had popes in their background and what have you, but they were not supporters of the papacy. They were all involved in politics, and I'm not sure exactly what went on there, but Pio Nono decided to level his curse, and what he said was that within 2 generations, there would be no more Caetanis. And of course, nobody believed it. 5 brothers, 1 daughter, there has to be some Caetanis. And although there are a few cousins out there, there is nobody in the direct line. So his curse actually came true. And Pio Nono is actually, sorry, trying to find my controls again. There we go. So Pio Nono, just as a little bit of an interesting aside, he is known as the Pope who carried on the war of morality in art. So he's the one who's responsible for the addition of fig leaves on most historical statues in Italy and elsewhere. And that was kind of his legacy that he is known for. But within 2 generations, the curse took effect, apparently. And Sveva is actually considered the last one in the direct line of the Caetanis. So beware what you say and do to popes. So Leone Caetani, his titles, all 17 of them, included things like Prince of Tiano, Duke of Sermoneta, Duke of San Marco, Marquis de Cisterna, Signor of Bassiano, Norma, Ninfa, San Donato, 17 different titles. He was a well-known scholar of Islam, born in 1869. He traveled throughout the Middle East. He was very well traveled. And he also, interestingly, in the 1880s, 1890s, he traveled to North America with a friend, landing in New York, going all the way across the continent. And he ended up in the Caetanis bear hunting. And while he was here, he also wrote a book called The Selkirks on the Caetanis. So definitely someone who paid attention wherever he went. The little picture next to it is just a picture of him as a baby when he was born in 1869. And I believe that's with his nurse, not with his mother. He was also a member of the Italian Parliament, at least between 1909 to 1911. And I would have to double check my dates on that. Around 1900, Leone had an arranged marriage. Interestingly enough, to Vittoria Colonna, who was a member of another ancient family from Naples. And this was only the second time that there had been a marriage between the Caetanis and the Colonnas in probably a millennia. They were always feuding, they were always fighting, they were always insulting each other, and they did not get along. So it was kind of a star-crossed match, perhaps, from the beginning. It did turn out to be quite a loveless marriage. With they had very, very different interests, and they did, however, have a son who was born in 1902, and he lived only until 1948. But by 1910, they were estranged and living apart. Around 1913, Leone had begun an affair in Rome with a young singer and dancer named Ophelia Fabiani. The story is that Ophelia was the daughter of a wealthy engineer, but we're still doing the research on that, and the story doesn't quite add up. So there's still a lot of research that needs to be done on that. Leone was deeply affected by the carnage and aftermath of World War I, and he basically seemed to turn away from societal expectations and propriety. His father died in 1917. He was the oldest son. He inherited everything, the titles and the land and everything like that. But what he did was that he began construction on this fabulous villa in Rome and installed Ophelia. And in 1917, Sveva was born. So he installed Ophelia and Sveva in this fabulous villa in one of the poshest areas of Rome, and in effect, kind of thumbing his nose at Italian society. It caused a huge scandal, and eventually, by 1921, a number of things happened. He would eventually leave everything behind, his titles, everything, his properties, for a new life in a new world, and selling his properties to his younger brothers, those that weren't owned by the family collectively, and he basically cashed out. He also left rather abruptly from Italy, and there are hints. We're not quite sure what set it off, but there are hints in letters that perhaps he felt threatened politically. And of course, it was Mussolini was coming into power, and it was the rise of fascism. And he was essentially a socialist, even though he was an aristocrat. He was essentially a socialist. So this he kind of left in the middle of the night, and it surprised his family and his associates. So I'm just going to take a quick side turn here. This is the Rafredo Caetani Foundation in Rome, in Latina, and it's actually in an old sort of religious building that used to house nuns, and the interesting thing about that is that when they moved to Canada, they arrived here on the shores with about 33 trunks. But what happened is that a couple of trunks apparently got left behind during one of their travels, because they did travel back and forth to Europe, and between Europe and North America several times during the 1920s. During one of those times, these two trunks were left and not loaded on. And these trunks remained in storage for 80 years. And the Rafredo Caetani Foundation got a phone call one day about 10 or 15 years ago saying, we have these trunks, they say Caetani on them. Are they any relation to your foundation? And if you pay the 80 years of storage, you can have your trunks back. And so they got together with the Leone Caetani Foundation in Rome, and between the two of them, they paid off the 80 years of storage fees, and they got these trunks. So what was inside the trunks? Well, this is an interesting thing that I'd like to show you. This is an early film, and this is actually Vittoria Colonna with her son. And it's quite a poignant film, because at a certain point, Vittoria took Onorato, the young boy, she took him to Scotland, and apparently he contracted measles. And so he was affected very, very badly. And he became physically and mentally challenged after that. But he seems quite young here, and quite quite normal, actually. So but he was not after that trip. It happened probably when he was about 6, maybe 5 or 6 years old. So this is the actual unit that was in the trunk that you use to play these kinds of films, and they're essentially stop motion. They're thousands of photographs that play, and you have to crank it and play it. So that's how that works. Now, there was one in the Vernon Museum of Leone and Sveva, but they cannot find it, and so they don't know if it was stolen or what has happened to it. But very disturbing that someone would steal that sort of thing, but one did exist. So again, I just want to sort of get across the point about Leone, the importance of Leone Caetani as a scholar. He published many articles, and he of course began this series of works, which was a 12-volume set of his works, and he's still considered to be one of the most still revered scholars of secular Islam today. So his influence is certainly still reverberating a century later. So today, although the family name has almost died out, with the exception of a few cousins and what have you, and it lives on in the various Caetani foundations. There are 4 Caetani foundations in Italy, and they still manage the remaining buildings and lands and institutions. So the Leone Caetani Foundation is located in Rome at the Accademia di Lincei, and you can see, like, Italy is just chock full, of course, of this amazing architecture and wonderful spaces and what have you. And even though this one here, it doesn't seem like much on the outside, this is the Palazzo Corsini in Rome, where it's located. But when you walk into these spaces, these sumptuous palatial spaces, it's really quite overwhelming. And this is the library upstairs, and I believe it is part of, it's all part and parcel of the university. But Leone, I'm just checking my notes here. Leone Caetani, when he started his foundation, hang on. When he started his foundation, most of his collection is actually held here at the Leone Caetani Foundation, but also a good portion of the Colonna family archives are also held here. And There we go. So, sorry, I'm just getting my bearings here. When he received quite an honor from the Académie de Linchai, and he won a prize. And this is probably one of the reasons why, because he was associated with them, that he decided to found his own foundation. And he actually, in doing so, he donated the equivalent of $450,000 Canadian to start the foundation, to the Academia de Linchai. This would have been around 1926, I believe, that he would have done this. So it was really quite an amazing amount of money for that time, and beautiful, again, beautiful spaces and what have you. And this was the curator, who is the curator of the Leone Caetani Foundation. And we had phoned her ahead of time, and my husband and I had made an appointment with her, and she was very suspicious of us. And when we got there, she was very reserved, and she was very, very careful in what she said. And of course, my husband speaks fairly fluent Italian. So we were able to continue a fairly decent three-way conversation with her. And so she began to warm up to us, and she realized that we were there, we were interested in the Caetani story, and that we also had an academic interest in it, and that we were bona fide people who weren't just taking up her time. And so she was wonderful, actually, at the end of all of this. And then she started bringing out like his original manuscripts, and I feel so lucky that we were able to see his original books and writings of the Selkirks, the notes that he had taken and what have you as he was traveling through here. So it was really quite an amazing situation. Now, here at the Caetani Centre, we have the death mask, they cast for the death mask of Leone's face and hands following his death. And in the 1970s, Sveva had it cast in bronze, and had the bronze copy sent to the Leone Caetani Foundation. So they have the actual bronze copy of that. We have the original, but ours is only plaster, unfortunately. So going back to Rome again, also in Rome, back to the Palazzo Caetani. The Palazzo Caetani, it's funny, Vittoria Colonna, Leone's wife, wrote at least 4 autobiographies of herself, in which she's really not very complimentary to the Caetani family at all. And she hated this place. She found it dark and dank, and not at all like the palace that she had grown up in Naples. And she really just couldn't relate to the artistic side of the Caetanis, the musicians and the scholars and all of those kinds of things. So it really was not a very good match between them. And she complained about how dark the palazzo was in Rome, and it was located on an interesting name is Via della Bottega Oscure, which I'm probably terribly pronouncing, but it means street of the dark shops. And there used to be apparently a theater on that street as well at some time. But these are the rooms inside of there, and they were absolutely beautiful, in my opinion. And again, they have an amazing collection of Caetani documents and things dating back a millennium, a lot of them on parchment and vellum. And there's an amazing library there. The Camillo Caetani Foundation is what manages that. And so again, the spaces, walking through spaces and seeing these spaces, we walked through the building and came out onto this lovely little garden area, and across the alleyway were these other more even more interesting spaces and areas that just kept on going. But the reason why I wanted this, that's my husband up there, who's having his picture taken with the different curator from the Camillo Caetani Foundation. But if you look on this, that is the same staircase that they're standing in front of. So they would have had their picture taken at some point at the same place as where we were standing as well. So as I had mentioned earlier, Leone was deeply affected by World War I, and so many things were changing at that time, of course. And also, don't forget the pandemic. There was a huge pandemic going on at the time as well, and 4 years of the Spanish flu going on at the time. And he had begun an affair in Rome with this beautiful young woman, Ophelia Fabiani. And again, he had built her this fabulous villa. This is actually what's considered to be Ophelia's villa in Rome. And we're not really sure how she got it or whether it was owned by the Caetanis or not. So there's, again, we're still doing research on that. But basically, when Sveva was born, they gave up everything that I've been showing you. Leone actually just gave up everything, gave up his titles and sold his properties to his younger brothers. And this villa here is actually located, we went looking for it, of course. So the picture on the left is the 1920s picture that's in the archives, and the picture on the right is the picture that we took. And it hasn't changed a whole lot in the 100 years since the picture was originally taken. It's a lovely little villa. And there's also, it's located in a beautiful, beautiful area in Rome, right across from the Borghese Palace, which is located on acres and acres of land as well. And there's a picture, this was actually taken from that villa, of Sveva with her governess when she would have been probably a little bit sooner than when they emigrated to Canada, so before 1921. So this is another thing that was in the trunks that we found. Now, we had only ever seen pictures of this as clay sculptures and works in progress. We didn't know if the actual bust had ever been produced or finished or anything like that. And we actually stumbled upon it when we walked into the Raffaello Caetani Foundation. And this is a really good indication of how they have accepted Sveva as being part of the Caetani family and the last of the Caetani family, because beforehand we actually went in 1997 on another trip, and Sveva and Ophelia were nowhere to be found anywhere, and now they're on the family tree and they have Sveva's things and what have you on display. And we actually found the bust, and this is the finished bust, and it's right as you walk in the front door of the Raffaello Caetani Foundation. So it was so lovely to see. It looks like it's carved out of butter. So Leone, of course, was something of a socialist, and I mentioned he was a parliamentarian, but some of the things that he stood for, he was against Italy invading Tripoli. He was against Italy entering the First World War. He was for women having the right to vote. So you can imagine that being the lone aristocrat, he kind of stood out, and he didn't make any friends by taking this kind of a stance. And although Mussolini had started out very much for the workers and more of a socialist, it was the rise of fascism in Italy, and he was on the wrong side of history at that time. And something happened that he left rather abruptly. He had been preparing for it. There was some kind of a threat there. And so he essentially gave up everything, and he relocated his 4-year-old daughter Sveva and her mother Ophelia to Vernon, of all places, in 1921. Perhaps because he had been here bear hunting, he kind of knew the area, although that was in the Caetanis. He probably, most likely, had some advice from some of his relatives, probably in England, that this was a place to come and a place where he could set up. They arrived with over 30 trunks full of clothing. They also had Miss Yule, the Swedish companion. And in 1921, Leone purchased the house and properties for $7,000 cash, which was about the equivalent of around $100,000 in today's money, which was still really a really good bargain considering the value of the house today. And he was intent on becoming something of a gentleman farmer orchardist, but it didn't quite work out that way. He actually really enjoyed chopping wood, and that's what he spent a lot of his time doing. Canadian laws also allowed him to formally adopt his own daughter so that she could legitimately carry the Caetani name. You could not do that in Italy. And when he left Italy, he of course cashed out, and he invested heavily in the stock market. So throughout the 1920s, Leone and his young family traveled extensively. Canada was kind of their base, but they had many trips to Europe. They went to New York and Mexico, through the canal and Cuba, places like that. They went on gambling trips to Monte Carlo. She remembers shopping with her mother in Paris for Chanel dresses. And we've actually just been contacted by Chanel as well about what we have in our collection. So that's kind of an interesting thing that just happened within the last week. We had a woman here who stayed here, Laurie Dennett, as part of our artist and writer in residence program. And she was writing a book, which has been published. It's called An American Princess, the Remarkable Life of Marguerite Chapman Caetani. She was married to Raffredo. And in that book, Laurie quotes Gelasio, who was Leone's younger brother, complaining about Ophelia spending money like a queen. In one day, apparently, Ophelia spent something like $7,000, $7,000 or $8,000, which was more than what this house was worth at the time. And so she didn't make any friends with Leone's family, and they did not like her, and they did not welcome her. Sveva during this time had specially hired art tutors, governesses. They had servants. There's also pictures of Ophelia here in Canada sitting on a pile of logs in her Chanel dress, and a really funny story about how she went flying in that dress when somebody tipped a log as well. And these pictures are quite interesting because Leone is like stripped to the waist and bare-chested and cutting wood, which is what he seemed to like to do a lot of. Of course, the global market crash happened in 1929, and he had invested heavily throughout the 20s in the stock market. So their wealth was severely diminished. There are many stories about that, and about how it affected the family, and also probably his health, because his health did begin to fail. So in an interesting parallel with Sveva's half-brother, Leone's son, Sveva also contracted measles. She was going to school in Crofton House, which was which is a girls' boarding school, very expensive girls' boarding school. And at that time, they pulled her out of the school, and probably because they were worried about the measles. But it was around the time of the crash also, and their financial difficulties starting. So it is possible that she just didn't go back because they couldn't afford it anymore. His health did begin to fail. This is a postcard that he sent to Sveva. It's a little hard to read, but it says, "Sweet darling Sveva, here is your father on his bed of torture. Happy Christmas. Sorry not to be with you. Love, your adoring father. Christmas 1934." And he did die within the year from throat cancer in Vancouver. He was only 66 years old. So here's where our story takes a really bizarre and interesting twist. So upon her father's death, Sveva's life changed considerably, and both her mother and daughter were devastated. Leone had been the glue that was holding the family together. Following the death of her father, the family fortunes were severely diminished, if not gone. We don't know what kind of income Ophelia may have had. We do know that over the next 25 years that they would be forced to occasionally sell Ophelia's jewelry to survive. There's documentation in the archives of that. One of the questions that we get from scholars who come over here to do research is, why did they not go back to Italy? Well, of course, Ophelia had not ingratiated herself with Leone's family at all. They didn't like her. They didn't want her to be there. They probably would have accepted Sveva, though, but Ophelia would never have stood for that. And one of the things that we have found out, and one of the conversations I was actually able to have with Sveva, because I asked her that question too, was that her mother had their bags and trunks packed to go back to Europe, and a war broke out in 1939. And so it was never discussed again. The bags were unpacked and it was never discussed again. And we have actually found some evidence for that in 1939, they were sending telegrams to book rooms in Paris, not Italy, but they looked like her mother was thinking of returning to Europe at least, and maybe to Paris, but then it never happened. Her mother was fragile, both physically and emotionally. She effectively cut off all social contact and access to the outside world. She basically condemned her bright daughter to a painful and lonely existence at the age of 17. She was, as I said just earlier, was pulled from Crofton House, but when her friends would come to see her, Ophelia would not allow them to even see her. She was forbidden to engage in her artwork. She was limited only to reading the books left by her father, although her aunt in Italy did send her boxes of books. And she essentially became a prisoner in her own home for over 25 years, from 1935 until her mother's death in 1960. So upon her father's death, her mother just simply became a hermit. So the isolation of young Sveva, it's really difficult for us to imagine today with our constant internet, radios, televisions, everything that goes on around us. And although the house today is located almost in downtown Vernon on the Lower East Hill, in 1935, it was still considered to be somewhat out of town. She was literally forbidden by her mother to even leave the house for the first 4 years, not even outside the front door. So she did have a bit of a breakdown, and apparently a doctor advised them that she had to get out for fresh air. And so she was then allowed out, at least onto the grounds. Ophelia constantly threatened her daughter with her failing health. She continually cited, she did have a heart condition, and she continually cited this and used this as a controlling device. Her mother developed an obsessive an obsession with cleanliness, probably a full-blown obsessive compulsive disorder. She removed all window coverings, lampshades, carpets, anything that could collect dirt and dust. She initiated rituals for preserving their food and meat, and she just became more and more obsessive as time went on. After her father died, Sveva basically spent the rest of her teenage years and early adulthood as a servant, washing, ironing sheets, polishing floors, alongside Miss Yule. And finally, after 16 years, about 16 years after Leone died, out of necessity, I think she was finally allowed to go downtown with Miss Yule as accompaniment, but she had to phone home every half hour. So she would have to find a phone and phone home, and never to go alone. So her mother died in 1960, and at the age of 43, Sveva was forced to find a job for the first time. And I'm not going to say too much else about what we're just talking about previously, because we literally do not know a whole lot of what went on in those 25 years, other than those few things that I've just mentioned. So this was such a change after her mother died. It was like a butterfly coming out of a cocoon. She was fluent in 4 languages, and she was employed as a French teacher at St. James Catholic Elementary School here in Vernon. And she eventually enrolled at the University of Victoria in 1965, and some of her friends helped to pay for that. And she obtained her teaching certificate in 1972 and returned to the area and taught at Charles Bloom Secondary School in Lumby for many years, where she was really a beloved teacher and mentor. Daily, we have people dropping by here who had Miss Caetani as a teacher, or who as an art teacher, or who were influenced by her, or she had helped, and many, many fond memories of her. So there was also an explosion of creativity when Sveva's mother died. She went back to painting. It was something that was always part of her. There's so many drawings of when she was a child and when her father was alive. And then this vast desert of very, very little creative work that she produced. And when her mother died, she a few years after she became a teacher in Lumby, she kind of had this epiphany, and she imagined this whole series, and she actually ended up creating this series of 47 large luminous watercolors. There's over 60 individual pieces, because some of the works are made up of separate individual pieces. And she also extensively wrote prose and poetry as well. So Recapitulation is symbolic of her life's journey. Her father had made sure that she knew where she came from, so she did know quite a bit about her family legacy. And she completed the series of these works called Recapitulation in 1989. It's the symbolic interpretation of Sveva's journey through life. She's accompanied in almost every painting by her father as her guide. The series of works were inspired by Dante's Divine Comedy, so their association with Dante goes back basically hundreds of years. And she examines the human condition and elements of man and his existence. And, these are not small subjects. And so she really, even though she's in a great part self-educated, she had her father's books, and she had her father's guidance for the first part of her life, for sure. Her father had no doubt instilled in her a deep sense of her history and an appreciation of her roots. So in many of the paintings, it's kind of like a Where's Waldo kind of scenario, that you will see the boatman. You can see it here in this green painting that we're showing of the boatman. And you can see the boatman. And now her mother is in the first half of the works, but her mother disappears about halfway through. And then it's just Sveva and her father and sometimes the boatman. So it's quite a fascinating series. And just to give you an idea of the scale of these works, because it's hard to tell from a small screen, Makimono of the Ninth is composed of 6 separate pieces. And when it's installed, it measures about 20 feet in length. So it is a massive work, and it's based on Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. So the series was exhibited nationally in Vancouver, all across the country, Nanaimo, Ottawa, Toronto, Edmonton, Victoria, Vernon. So she did offer the entire series to the BC Arts Council. However, she always had conditions attached to everything. And she wanted it archivally framed and looked after. It was a huge series, these 47 works. You can see, you know, some of the scale of the works that she's working on here. And also, unfortunately, she was a complete unknown back in the 1980s. Nobody knew about Sveva. So she ended up, she had friends who had connections to the Alberta Foundation for the Arts in Edmonton. And the curator, who actually we were still working with this year, Gail Lynch, she came and in the 1980s, and she looked at the work, and she was astounded by what she saw. And she agreed to take the whole series, to keep it intact and to keep it, then to frame it the way Sveva wanted it. And it was stored at the Alberta Foundation for the Arts for 35 years. And thank goodness it was, because they kept the series together. And that was so, so important. And we have just recently, of course, gotten it back. So prior to her death in 1994, Sveva was starting to gain that acknowledgement for her work. She was interviewed on CBC Radio by Vicky Gabbro. She was interviewed, she was an hour-long focus of an Ideas radio program with Paul Kennedy. Heidi Thompson, a local woman here of Coldstream Books, put together Sveva Caetani, the Recapitulation series, and combined it with some of the writings on each piece. There have been several academic publications. She was the subject of a Cura research project and a master's dissertation at the University of Victoria. And award-winning writers have been inspired by her. Daphne Marlatt, this is a wonderful book called Reading Sveva, a book of prose and poetry and illustrated by Sveva's own artwork. And most recently, Little Fortress. Leisha Rosnow is a local award-winning writer as well, and she teaches at UBC. Also, and Little Fortress is the story of the Caetani family from the perspective of Miss Yule, and apparently it's just been optioned for a movie also, so that's really exciting. I'm missing a slide. Oh, I think I went past this one, so I'll just go back to it. There had been already several films. Sveva Imprisoned was actually an official selection of the Miami Women's Film Festival. And there's also a film out there which we cannot find and we have never seen, but it's called The Mystery of Sveva Caetani by Agustin Liviano Cordero. If anybody has any information about that, we would certainly appreciate it. We think that it was produced around the time of the Cura grant through the University of Victoria, but we just have not been able to do the research on that. And we also have 2 other film companies who are interested in doing, one from Toronto and one from Calgary, who are interested in doing a biography of Sveva's life. So I am going to wrap up. I hope I haven't gone over time. I get talking and I lose track of time, and I don't have a clock on here, so I apologize if that has happened. I would like to just mention too that as one of the last surviving members of the Caetani family, she did receive a half-page obituary notice also in the London Times. So you know, we really do have this amazing story here in the Okanagan. And what we've been doing, of course, she left the house and grounds to the city of Vernon, and we're the society that manages it. But we have been making upgrades to the house, of course, so that we could open the house. That we were never allowed to open the house because we had to do a complete fire suppression system. We had to upgrade the electrical. We had to do a complete HVAC system overhaul before we could even allow the public into the house. So we did the open house project. We raised well over $350,000 to do this project. Actually, by the time this most recent part of the project is done, it'll be more like $750,000. So, but because we were able to do this and we got all of this support, much fundraising, local people who contributed and gave us the seed money, local, provincial and federal governments matched it. We were able to open the house to the public. So many people donated to that. It was really just an amazing demonstration of support that we really appreciated. So working with architects, we actually, in 2019, we actually constructed a vault inside the house to accommodate the archival storage of the new collections that came back. And so this is basically a fireproof room that we have done, or as fireproof as we can make it. Of course, we are also a heritage house and site, and but we've done a lot of work to the house. So some of the collections that we've received over 1,000 artifacts from the Vernon and District Museum. We've received over 30 artifacts from the Kelowna Museum, a lot of Chanel and V&A, haute couture dresses and things like that from the Kelowna Museum that Sveva handpicked herself and donated to the Kelowna Museum before. Unfortunately, a lot of her mother's items went for auction, and a good portion of the fashion pieces went to a collector in Japan, apparently. The most important thing is that we've received the Recapitulation series back from the Alberta Foundation for the Arts from Edmonton. And we're also in discussions. There's about 30 or 40 items at the Dougal Costume Museum in Manitoba, as well as individual private donors have been donating works of art back to us. And we just got a collection of over 45 drawings from a friend of hers who was in Manitoba also. And so our collection is definitely growing. We wouldn't have been able to have gotten our displays and everything up and ready for display without the support of our volunteers. We have had some amazing volunteers and staff people and board members who have helped with the opening of this place. And we still have a lot of work to do. We didn't get everything finished that we needed to do, but we needed to open in time. We told everyone we were opening on July 2nd, and we did. So, but it's thanks to all of these improvements that we were able to have all of these things returned to the North Okanagan. This is where it was originally conceived and made and created, and this is where it rightfully belongs. So we're very, very grateful to all of these organizations who are basically repatriating the collections back to us. We opened for tours as of July 2nd, and we had a sold out season. We ran until December. We kept adding as much as we could with our limited staff, and we kept adding, and then the weather kind of came in and COVID kind of shut us down a couple of times, and but we were able to have some tours through the house. And so these are just some examples of the house inside the house. And this is our next project. Because our exhibition space, we only are able to show, it's limited in size. It's only 800 square feet, which is this space here that if any of you have been for the tour, you will have been brought through there. We are hoping to expand our exhibition space and add on to it so that we can show the entire collection, because it really is a story. It tells a story all by itself, and we need to have it a large enough space to present the whole thing. Right now, we have only the first 3 sections, which is the first 17 paintings on display. And we will be changing that out, so there will be other opportunities to do that. So what we are doing, our goal is to raise $65,000. So far we've raised, actually, this is a little out of date, we've raised just over $20,000. And we only started in November. And what we're asking people to do is to sponsor a painting. And so if you are interested in doing that, you can go to our website or call us, and we would be happy to help you out with that. But we call it Bringing Sveva Home. And we are trying to have a permanent home for all of her artwork to be displayed. So I'm going to wrap this up, and forgive me if I've gone over time, but just sort of an interesting little thing. Janet Munsell wrote a play about Sveva, and she was one of our writers in residence here. And she had someone who was writing to her, didn't know the address of the place or what the place was called. They just knew that she was an artist in residence. So she used to get these postcards all the time, and they were just addressed Janet Munsell, artist in residence, Haunted House, Vernon, BC. And the post office delivered them without fail to the Caetani Centre. So goes to show you, we do have ghost tours also, and we did quite a successful run of ghost tours this year. So lots and lots of different aspects to this story. And I'd just like to say at this time, just thank you so much for inviting me to give this talk. And I really would love to invite everybody to come and have a tour of the house, because the tour is different from my talk as well. So. And I think that's about it. I can maybe stop screen sharing at this point.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Susan. I prefaced this by saying it was an amazing story. It was an amazing story that I hadn't heard before. And I certainly think those of you who joined us have a new appreciation for some of the things you'll find in the Okanagan as you start digging into some of these stories. We do have some time for some questions. You can either, if you prefer, you can either type it into the chat box and I'll ask it on your behalf, or if you want to unmute yourselves, just chime in and ask directly.
Yes, Susan, it's Dave Hawkins. So you mentioned that for 25 years, she really was not part of the world, so to speak. And you mentioned that nothing is really known about that time. Do you know if she was working on her art during that period?
No, well, we know very little. We just know sort of snippets and stories from Sveva or stories that she told her friends. And we also get contradictory stories being told. So we were told that and we have, some of Miss Yule's writings also back this up, that her mother did not allow her to paint or draw. And if she did her little drawings and things like that, they had to be like very small so she could hide them. And that her mother would punish her for doing these drawings. But on the other hand, the collection that we just got back seems to have been drawings made in the 1930s. And perhaps because it was a topic that interested her mother, they're all fashion drawings. So they're all drawings done from books, most likely, that are costumes of different times through history. And so they're like drawings of women's clothing and things like that. And that certainly would have been an interest of her mother's. And so it seems like on the one hand, she couldn't draw what she wanted, but on the other hand, if it pleased her mother, then possibly she could. So Sveva has told stories. Actually, it was listed in her obituary, the one that appeared here in Vernon, like her mother made her sleep with her in the same room. And at some point, Sveva rebelled and took her mattress and threw it out into the hallway and refused to sleep in the same room with her mother anymore. So, but there are all these stories about like this obsessive compulsive kinds of things, no light coverings, no window coverings, no rugs on the floor. It was a very spare existence because of her mother's obsessive compulsive disorder.
And also, who looked after the house when Sveva went to Victoria?
Yeah, when she went to Victoria, I believe she rented it out. And like I say, we've had so many interesting people drop by. Everybody from the taxi service that used to deliver their groceries to students and things like that. And one time, a woman came by and said, my family lived in the house from 1970 until 1975. And that would have been the time Sveva was getting her degree. She graduated in, I think, 72, but then she got the job in Lumbee. So she had actually moved out to Lumbee with Miss Ewell, and they were living in Lumbee for the first part of her job there. And she actually had the house up for sale during that time, but she apparently used to drive by the front of the house. They would see her in her car, and the family was going to buy the house, and they were all prepared to sign the papers in 1975, and everything was going through, and they would see Sveva driving by really slowly on Pleasant Valley Road and then turning around and coming back. And she obviously was having second thoughts, and she obviously had second thoughts. And so they weren't able to buy the house. But what this woman, she and her 4 sisters and her brother lived here, and they were having a family reunion. So it was before we were open. And so they had asked me if I would mind giving them a tour through the house where I could. And so I did, and got all these wonderful stories in exchange for that. So yeah, it's an interesting story.
Susan, I have a question from Gabriella. What relationship does the Caetani Centre have with Italy today, and is Sveva's work recognized in Italy?
Yes, it is. And we do have a relationship over there. And as I said, they were so welcoming and so gracious. When my husband and I went over there in 2019, we were able to spend time with each of the 4 foundations and to meet with people from the foundations. They showed us around, they took us on tours. We had wonderful meals, of course. It was Italy. And it was absolutely amazing. And Pietro Vitelli, who has he's a scholar from Italy and works with the foundation, also teaches at I believe at Sapienza University. He has written just recently an article for and I'm sorry I don't have the publication here, but for a Toronto publication. They're in the Italian language Toronto publication. He wrote an article about Sveva's artwork for that, and he also published through the Raffredo Caetani Foundation a book specifically on Sveva, and he has sent us a couple of copies here. I'm not sure if it's available widely or how many were published or anything like that, but it was quite a substantial book, and he was here doing research. He wanted to go and see the graves here, and we also took him around a little bit. He was only here a very, very short time, but he did what research he could in that time. And he was also involved when we went over there. He was our contact between a lot of different places as well. So it is definitely a relationship that we hope to grow. I would kill to go back to Italy again, and to do more research. And I was able to spend several hours in the archives. Luckily, my husband is also my translator, and although I can read a bit of Italian and understand it, I do not speak it very well. And but he helps a lot, and they were actually quite surprised at how well he spoke Italian, and they complimented him on his Italian. So yeah, we hope to go back there and to do more research, and you know, his family, his mother, of course, was British, and so Leone himself could speak, I believe it's at least seven or eight different languages. And he often, like, all the letters to his mother are in English, and sometimes the letters between the family, sometimes they're in English, sometimes they're Italian, occasionally they're in French. There's a few letters in our archives where we're not quite sure what the language is, and haven't been able to figure it out yet. It's not even like a Middle Eastern language. That's sort of a script that we would recognize, but yeah, there's so much research still that needs to be done, and translations and what have you. And we have worked with people over the years also, who have started to translate a lot of the letters and what have you. And we're also the first time we went over, and we were actually able to connect with them again when we went over, first of all in 1997, but then again in 2019. He used to be the Caetani historian, and his wife was American, and they actually ran an English-Italian school in Latina after he had left the foundation, and he was a wealth of knowledge also. And because his wife was American, we kind of carried on a four-way conversation between speaking English and Italian and back and forth, and over many glasses of wine and Aperol. So it was a wonderful time that we had there, a very magical time.
Susan, I have a quick question. When was it when Leone came hunting in the Caetanis?
I believe in the 1880s. So he would have been, or maybe the early 1890s. I would have to find out about that, because I'm I think misremembering the exact date, but he would have been probably in his 20s. He was born in 1869. So I'm thinking probably the early 1890s is when he would have come.
The reason I'm asking is we actually know that Archduke Franz Ferdinand came bear hunting in the BC interior in 1893. So I was just wondering if there was any possible connection there.
He came with a friend who was also an aristocrat, and I'm sorry I don't have the name on the tip of my fingers here, but he was actually a Russian gentleman that he traveled with. And it was a friend of his. And it wasn't the Archduke Ferdinand, I do know that. However, it's very possible that there may have been some connection there, or
well, it was kind of the thing to do for the well-to-do in Europe after the railway was finished, to kind of come to the wilderness. So I just thought it was worth a shot.
Yeah. No, I do have the name of the person he was traveling with, and yeah, I can find it for you if you're interested.
Yeah, no, it'd just be interesting. Did anyone have any other questions for Susan?
Yes, Susan. Having coming from a third or fourth generation Italian family, I was always interested in the Italian history in the Okanagan. It wasn't until about 10, 15 years ago when I joined the Okanagan Historical Society that I heard about this house. And I read articles about it, but they were strictly factual things about this house with some royal connection. But tonight, this astounds me to find out what this is all about. And thank you very much. I mean, this is the whole history, the way back, and all the connections. This has been fantastic. So thank you. I look forward to going further with this.
Oh, thank you so much. And, you know, we call ourselves, you know, Vernon's best kept secret. And we're trying to change that. It's such a fascinating story. Leisha, when her book was published, we were both interviewed by Michael Onright for the Saturday morning show. You can actually listen to that if you go to CBC Podcasts. You can find it on there. And that would have been in January 2020 that we were interviewed for that. So later in January, around the 24th or the 26th, I think. And you know, since the publication of Leisha's book, there's been a renewed interest, and we have so many book clubs who are coming, you know, to take the tour from Kamloops, from Kelowna, from Penticton, anywhere where they could travel during COVID. They have been coming. We've had, you know, people dropping by here saying, oh, I heard the interview or my sister in Nova Scotia heard the interview. And there's such a fascination with this story. And I really do believe it's an absolute gem of a story, and not only just because of the story, but because of the creative product that came out of it also, because I really do believe that Sveva is very much an underrated artist, and I'm very, very grateful for the Alberta Foundation for keeping that collection together, because that's how it remained together. Otherwise, it probably would have been dispersed and gone into the ether somewhere. So, you know, all of these things have been coming together, and we really want to, you know, keep on doing the research. It's there's a lot of things we don't know still, and just sort of a caveat also is that with Leisha's book, Leisha is an award-winning writer, and very creative, and teaches at UBC, and but the story is based on fact. It's a work of fiction. There are things that happen in there that of course are just her imagination. And so with these book tours and things that come through, we do have to kind of bring them down
Yes.
you know, to reality, and say, well, maybe it didn't quite happen that way. And also we've done other research since the book was published, and we found out a few things, like maybe Ophelia's father was not a wealthy engineer. That was always the story that Sveva told. Lots of ins and outs and intrigue, and it's the never-ending story that keeps on giving, apparently. So we still have lots to find out.
Patricia Rantucci here. I just wanted to thank you for a great presentation tonight. It's really eye-opening. I think I did hear about it from the CBC last year or the year before, so that it piqued my interest when I saw the invite from the Italian Club to join tonight's event. And so I thank you for the presentation. I'm just curious, I'm a fine art alumni with UBCO. So I'm just curious if they've ever reached out to you and partnered in some way in teaching the students at the fine arts program.
We have a bit of a relationship with them. I did my master's degree at UBCO, so I know quite a few of the faculty over there. But as far as like art historians and things like that, they were when we were hoping to get the collection back, they were actually being very, very helpful as a space to store it if we needed it and that kind of thing. But we were able to bring the house up to a certain standard. We installed, like, throughout the 6,000 square feet, we have an entire fire suppression system. We have, you know, brand new electrical and HVAC and all of these kinds of things. We have created like fireproof rooms and things like that. We have a full security system and smoke detection and all of those kinds of things. So we do have a relationship with them, but I guess the mandate, and there's still so many people who don't know about Sveva. And again, that's what we're looking to change. And we do feel that her work is really underrated, and that it deserves to be looked at much more than what it has. So hopefully in the future we'll be able to develop that relationship a bit more. And like I say, the Cura grant at the University of Victoria was an academic study of the Caetani family and Sveva and her artwork. And there were some publications, and I believe that film came out of there as well, the one that we've never seen and can't find. So so there is a lot of interest out there. I guess it would just take someone to decide that that's their project, like what happened at the University of Victoria.
All right. I'll give someone a chance to do a last question, and then I'll ask David to wrap us up.
Susan.
Mark and Mary.
It was Mark and Mary.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very enjoyable and very informative, and surprising that, as was mentioned earlier, that this story has roots in the Okanagan and no one knows about it. Or we're learning about it now. And I wanted to know, will the house be open this year in 2022?
Yes, we're planning a number of things. We've hired, we got a grant through the Young Canada Works project through the Department of Canadian Heritage. So we've hired a curatorial intern, a young woman who's doing research specifically on Sveva's paintings and the writings that go along with it, because we've only had the works and the titles and those very, very basic things up so far. So one of the questions we get asked so much about Sveva's work, and her work is all on our website, so please go and take a look at it. The whole series is up there of Recapitulation. There's a lot more work too that we also have in the vault, but those are individual pieces that aren't part of that series. And so anyway, we're putting together a lot more information, because one of the questions we get about her work is, what does this mean? Right? Because she was very well read. She knew about philosophy. She had her father's influence in the early part of her life and his books after his death. She was endlessly curious. I remember having a conversation with her one afternoon, and she educated me, I guess is the word, on fractal theory and how she used it in her works. I had no idea what fractal theory was, and so that was a real education for me. She wrote letters to Einstein. She wrote letters to Stephen Hawking, and they answered her. So she was brilliant in her own way. She could carry on a conversation with somebody like Einstein and Stephen Hawking, and they would answer her. They wouldn't just dismiss her. So we have those letters, and what we're doing here is the display that we opened with was very, very basic. We had to get open. We had a deadline. We had to put the story up and try and get as much done as we could for it. Now what we have is we have the luxury of time, and it's going to be a work in progress for several years. So we will be, we're opening more rooms upstairs. So we will be changing out the exhibits. We do not have everything on display. A lot of it is in boxes and storage still. So we will be changing out displays. As I said, we only have the first 3 parts of her paintings up right now. And so we're going to be changing that out as much as we can, so that at least local people also will have more of a chance to come. But if we ever get back to a regular tourism season, we know that there's interest out there from beyond our own borders, and even as far as, of course, Italy and Europe as well for this story. So there's going to be a lot to come back to see also. So so I don't want anybody who has been here to feel like they've come here and heard the whole story either, or seen the whole story, or seen all of the artifacts and things, because things will be changing, and we're going to try and keep things fresh, and also to take looks at, you know, different ways of presenting exhibitions and themes and things like that, and different means of focusing. So that's what our curatorial intern is working on right now. So lots of exciting things coming in the future, and yeah, it's tell your friends.
Yeah. We'll bring our friends.
Bring your friends, yes, yes, and come back, because you will see things that you didn't see before.
Thank you.
All right, David, can I ask you to say a few words?
So thank you, Susan, for your presentation this evening. As it's been said, it's quite a fascinating story. I had no idea of the background history of the family going back to Italy. That's actually quite interesting. And you know, how people overcome adversity. This is certainly a story to be told and retold, and probably more information will come along the way. And so you're bringing that to light. Looking forward to a movie about it, and reading Little Fortress, considering that it's based on a true story, as is said, because a lot will remain a bit of a mystery. And I'm looking forward to a tour there this year. I'm sure there are going to be hot tickets once again, bringing family and friends from afar. Thank you so much for presenting tonight the story, and also thanks to Gord Hotchkiss and Don Ramponi for inviting you, Susan, and for organizing this whole series of talks. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight too.
Thank you.
It was good.
It was my pleasure, and thank you so much for inviting me. It's my favorite topic.
All right.
Yeah, you must have had quite the tour over there, over in Italy. It would have been fascinating.
Yeah, I've actually had some people ask me if I would do that, and we certainly want to go back. So it's a possibility. I would love to do that. Yeah.
And I remember going to an art auction. You were probably part of this back in probably the early or mid 90s, maybe in the 90s there.
Here, yeah, that would have been through the art gallery, and I was at the art gallery until 2001. Yeah. So I was, that's how I met Sveva, was we already knew in 1989 when I first moved here that we were going to be receiving the house, and so we would meet with her and talk with her about that at the time, until her death in 94. Unfortunately, the art gallery, the house was over and above the art gallery's mandate, and we didn't have the staff or the mandate to deal with the house. So that's why the house, nothing much was done with it. I left the art gallery in 2001 and went back to school, did a whole bunch of different things, and I had the opportunity to come back here in 2013. So I've been here for 9 years now again. We finally got the house open, but it's taken us 9 years to do that. It's been a real labor of love, for sure. And yeah, so we became a separate society, which was the best thing that happened to us in 2008. when it was finally accepted that, we were beyond the scope of the art gallery. We needed to be our own separate society in order to see the organization move forward. So it's been a journey for sure. And I've been involved for.
It certainly has paid off. It certainly has paid off.
It really is, and we really believe in it. We believe in Sveva's work and her writings and her creativity, and the story is just so fascinating. So it's one we need to tap.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. We did record this and we will be posting it to our YouTube channel and our website. So if you enjoyed the presentation, spread the word to your friends, and give me a few days to get it up there, but I will send out a notification when it's posted live. Thank you again, Susan. It was wonderful, and everyone have a good evening.
Thank you.